What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, and today I am alone. That's right, we're just talking with me. You're going to be listening to my thoughts. Now, we're doing something special today. I put out a short time ago, and it's on our website. Please go check it out, see if you're still interested. You can go on there, and for the wonderful price of £10, you can have me give my thoughts and have a discussion, or at least have a chat, about a film, book, comic, whatever. And on this occasion, long-time supporter, good friend of the show, and appreciated supporter, Nick Bray, sent me a request to... And obviously paid up. He went on the website, did all the bits and pieces, wonderful, and has asked me to consider the last film, I believe it's the last film, of Peter Sellers. So the last on-screen performance of Peter Sellers in 1980. The Fiendish plot of Dr. Fu Manchu. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give my thoughts on this, and I'll probably go off on some tangents. You know what I'm like, that's what I do. So, this film, The Fiendish plot of Fu Manchu from 1980, stars Peter Sellers as Fu Manchu and Dennis Nayland Smith. It also features a very young and very attractive Helen Mirren, David Tomlinson, Sid Caesar, and a bunch of others, including Burt Kwok, which we'll get onto in a minute. The story of the film, or the plot of the film, is Fu Manchu, at the age of 168, is celebrating his birthday. And it has come time for him to once again take a sip or a drink from his elixir of youth. A drink that gives him back his youth and will allow him to continue his reign of criminality and terror for a number of years. However, during the ceremony in which he is to be passed the vial of the elixir, it is spilt and it is all destroyed. And therefore he has to set up a series of crimes to steal the ingredients so that he can reformulate this elixir and take it before he dies, basically. And then so he sets up this thing, and they then bring in the FBI, so in Scotland Yard, when these crimes happen, bring in Nayland Smith, who has crossed paths with Fu Manchu in the past, and is there sort of like the detective nemesis, the counterpart to Fu Manchu, and they go on this adventure to bring down Fu Manchu whilst all these crimes are going on. The tone of the film is supposed to be, and I say supposed to be loosely, is supposed to be a comedy. If anything, it's supposed to be a parody, and I think parody sort of was starting to really, you get sort of, parody sort of hits its real sort of niche in the sort of 70s and 80s, but it's not like, this isn't Hot Shots or Lethal, Naked Gun. All right, this isn't, or even Loaded Weapon, like National Lampoon's Loaded Weapon. This isn't that level of absurdity and comedy. Like, this isn't sort of that kind of lampooning of tropes. It's more gentle than that. Like, it has an absurdity to it, mostly. I mean, for example, like Peter Sellers is Nayland Smith goes everywhere with a lawnmower, and it is his sort of compatriot and sort of partner, and it's at one point stolen from him in the film, and it devastates him. But it's all very gentle. It's not like a big sort of like it's not like a rib punching sort of like just to make a complete comparison. Like, it has absurdity. We'll get to the absurdity, but it never sort of hits you in the same way as sort of like some of the stuff that was done in Hot Shots or Hot Shots Part 2 or The Naked Gun, or it's not really sort of like broad comedy. If anything, I would say that sometimes some of the jokes in this, like, you have to have a real knowledge of some of the things that they're talking about. But if it's a parody, it has to be parodying something. So what is it parodying? Well, let's go back even further. So Fu Manchu is a character that was created and first appeared in 1913, created by a guy called Sax Rohmer, British writer, and he appeared in the book was called The Mystery of Fu Manchu, and it appeared in serialized form in like the pulp magazines and newspapers and that sort of thing, and then was collected as a series of books. And there were a whole host of Fu Manchu books. I think of there's 14, maybe more than that, but I think 14 seems to be in my head, between 1913 and 1957, I think. And there's a whole bunch of them. Like, so there's sort of like the reign of Fu Manchu, the island of Dr. Fu Manchu, the daughter of Dr. Fu Manchu, and so on and so forth. I've got quite a few of them actually. They're not bad. They're good pulpy novels. However, they are very much of their time, and especially some of the early ones. So, but they're weird in the sense that so that the protagonist or the antagonist, weirdly no, they are named after Fu Manchu. Dr. Fu Manchu is the antagonist. He is the one that is committing the crimes and all that kind of stuff. But in doing so, you have to have someone find him. And so you get Nayland Smith, who becomes like it's like a Sherlock Holmes to Moriarty kind of scenario, but instead of it being sort of like the Nayland Smith series, it's the Fu Manchu series. Like, so it's named for the villain. However, the problem is it's incredibly racist. Like, if you read it now, it stems from a period in the sort of early 20th century, which lasted well into the 40s. So not even it didn't die off for a while. It's quite recent. This idea they called the Yellow Peril, and I'm not going to support it. I'm just saying I'm explaining what it was. And this was like categorized like this thing of the Yellow Peril, and this Yellow Peril was fear of growth and strength rising in the East, and a big part of this came from Victorian expansion. So from a British point of view, you may have heard of things like the Opium Wars, in which case where we basically rolled in, took Hong Kong, bombed the crap out of parts of China, and sailed away. And we did it a couple of times. And we had this like weirdly sort of like love-hate relationship with the East, both China and Japan, and I suppose they're sort of like the sub-Asian sort of countries, that sort of Korea and the Philippines and stuff. We traded with them all. We traded with them. We went there. We wanted to be there, but we were really scared of then their population and the growth of ideas and all this other stuff. So when they started to show some strength in there's this splendid isolationism that they had for a long time, especially in China and Japan. They had this idea of sort of splendid isolationism of like, you will not come in. Like, we do not trust the outside world. You are a foreigner. And therefore, and so this xenophobia went both ways. Like, let's not kid ourselves. Like, it's not no one is innocent in this. Look, weirdly, looking back at history, very few people are innocent. No, that's not to say there aren't innocents. I'm not getting into it, but on a country scale. Anyway, in England, as the empire sort of like entered its final phase, this idea of the Yellow Peril really struck home, and so you get characters like this. It also comes back to haunt in there are a number of sort of like but Disney and Looney Tunes cartoons with Asian depictions of characters very stereotypical. Sort of like, say, the yellow skin, the big teeth, slit closed eyes. These characteristics very stereotypes and very, very incredibly racist. And the lispy voice as well, the lispy accent as well, which I'm not going to do. And this sort of idea it ebbs and wanes, and it obviously came back during World War II, especially more against Japan than China. But post that, it doesn't go away. It just becomes less relevant until you get to the 80s and you get the fear of Japan again and its expansion, its technological expansion, sort of post World War II. But that's a different kettle of fish. Pulling this back, what I'll say is that this idea is this film. One of the problems I have with this film is Peter Sellers. Like, Peter Sellers is great. If you've ever watched loads of films, but like the Pink Panther films or Doctor Strangelove and those sort of things, like, he is very good at. He's a character actor. He's a very good character comedian. Like, he's able to play the buffoon. But where he's able to play a Frenchman in Dr. Clouseau, and it's fine because he's playing a white character and that sort of thing, you know, whether they be French or American or whatever, or even a German, as he does in Dr. Strangelove. The problem comes when you start to cross race, and I'm really struggling with how to articulate this without sounding too rough. But basically, he is wearing makeup and other things to make him look Chinese, and he then plays Fu Manchu, and you know it's played for comedy in some parts. However, weirdly, like Fu Manchu is never played as the buffoon. Do you know what I mean? And that's the weird thing about this. And even going back to those original books, when you read them, there are phrases in there. There's a scene in particular in one of the early books I remember where Nayland and one of his partners are in a hotel and they're under attack from these Chinese, not quite ninjas, but these sort of martial artists. And there's a phrase where one of them, they're crawling through the window to sort of like sneak up on Nayland, and when Nayland spots them, he describes them as these fighting yellow beasts, and it's always stood out to me in that phrase, like, you know. But there's almost like a begrudging respect of it, like we're gonna use racial slurs up the wazoo, you know, we're gonna go mad with it because we can in these books in the 30s and the before, but also we're gonna acknowledge that Fu Manchu is a great strategist. He's, you know, incredibly intelligent. He is, you know, this great master criminal, and also their soldiers and their fighters are incredibly talented and incredibly dangerous. And so it's a bit like I sort of see it like as in wrestling. One of the things in wrestling, when you cut in a promo or when you see the really good guys cutting a promo, it's not just them coming out and slating their opponent. You basically have to big up your opponent to make sure to you look good. So if you're going to win, or even if you go over, or even if you have to, you know, line your back, you have to make sure your opponent looks good. If you go out there and say like he's a weed and he's rubbish and I've seen he can't wrestle his way out of a paper bag and that's all you do, well, when he kicks your ass, you're like, oh well, you look even worse, you know. Or if you win, well, all you've done is beat the guy who can't wrestle his way out of a paper bag. So you have to sort of big them up, and it sort of feels a little bit like that these books were designed to fuel the fear of the yellow peril. Like, you know, this thing it's a peril because it's a danger. If it was all buffoonery and they were played for laughs or they were played to be stupid or whatever, like it wouldn't work because there'd be no fear. But well, why would we fear these people? They're silly and they're daft and they can't do anything. They are barbaric. And so there's this weird line that sort of this balanced across through the novels in particular, where they are depicted as both incredibly dangerous, incredibly sophisticated, and incredibly intelligent, yet described as things like beasts and subhuman. And so it's a bizarre balance, and it doesn't always work. The books, if you're just looking for fun, pulpy, if you want to go back to those 30 eras pulps, like they're good fun, they're good pulpy adventures, they're very silly in some places, and you know, sort of like escaping ridiculous scenarios and all that kind of thing. But be aware that they do carry a stigma of the era that, thankfully, if it hasn't gone completely, is going away. You know, is getting mushed. So just be aware of that. This film, The Fiendish Plot of Fu Manchu, carries some of that with it. Now, the opening of the film is a fantastic display of athleticism and martial arts from 6 guys who are chosen to be Fu Manchu's sort of like chosen fighters or chosen warriors for this mission, the series of crimes. And then it goes off for them to be in training, and you know they're then looked over by this chubby guy who, again in Chinese makeup and sort of garb, and it's really uncomfortable. But then you've got these guys and they're doing flips and they're doing sort of like these, you know, all this sort of kicking and they're using weapons and stuff. And it is seriously impressive. Like think about when you see those sort of like, you know, you see those Buddhist warrior monks doing all their stuff where they sort of like, you know, they run up a pole and then they hang there and stuff. And you're like, how is this physically possible? Or they sort of like they'll crack a cement block with their face. These people have got such immense control over their bodies. So it follows this same line where you are going to display how dangerous and how talented these guys are from the outset for you to go, these are a threat. They are dangerous. We need someone to face off against these. That's why you need Nayland Smith. However, then in the film, they will be routinely shown up to be defeatable. They are beaten time and time again. And it's that thing of like, well, we've shown how good they are, so Nayland must be better. And it's exactly the same thing, and it shows this line of English, or British, I should say, sort of the Empire, sense of superiority. And again, this film is set in 1933. It makes it clear. It's around 1933, which again, it thinks is a joke. Don't think it works. But it's showing this sort of notion of this sort of the waning empire, but there's still this sense of self-importance within the world, and it drips with it in this film, and also, but it brings in both this Western versus Eastern rhetoric constantly. If it was just Nayland Smith versus Fu Manchu, as it often was in the books, it would be just a case of man versus man. You could literally play it man versus man. This is a game of cat and mouse, and race has got nothing to do with it. It just so happens that one's Chinese and one's English. It's fine. However, Nayland Smith is brought in and then routinely supported throughout the film by members of Scotland Yard and 2 American FBI agents. And so you do get this sense of West versus East. And at the centre of this is sort of like Nayland. And so it carries up with it, and especially in 1980. Weirdly as well, that sort of the Russians are involved in it. It's 1933, so you would be talking communist Russia. And it's them that have the first crime is for a diamond to be stolen, and so it's stolen. It's a Russian Tsar's diamond, but it's stolen in America. So, which again, you think like the Russians having some art display or historical display in America in the 1930s seems incongruous, I suppose, because we know it more as the conflict of the Cold War. And especially in America, or especially in 1980, when you're sort of like, yes, you only had 10 years left of the Cold War, but, Glasnost hadn't really taken off at that point, so you hadn't really got that sort of like the de-escalation of animosity between the two, so it was still pretty tough. People were still fearing that nuclear reprisal. So it feels odd in that respect as well. Like, it doesn't seem to know why, but it wants to do these things. And so, so you've got this East versus West sort of sense throughout the entire film. And so they have this idea of sort of sophistication and stuff in the East, but sort of like common sense and stiff upper lippedness and all this other stuff in the West. And so, and that sort of seems to just play out. And then it just becomes scene after scene of silliness. Now, Helen Mirren plays a police woman who is then used to be a stand-in for the Queen. Now, there's a dripping with sort of like premonition, because of course she then played the Queen again in the Queen in the 90s, I think early 2000s actually, the film that follows the immediate aftermath of Princess Diana's death. But here she's playing a different Queen, because it's 1933, so it would be the Queen Mother? I don't know, even if it is actually, because so she was born in... I'm not going to try and figure it out, can't be bothered, doesn't matter. But she's playing a version of the Queen, but she's clearly playing Queen Elizabeth II, so it plays weird at times, it really does. And it has these weird moments. It constantly has these odd little moments in it where you're like, oh, that makes sense. Like, she plays saxophone. It never really goes anywhere until you have a scene with her and Fu Manchu, and it's sort of like he is seduced by her playing the saxophone. Other than that, like, it makes no sense. But they want to load this thing with Easter eggs. So at the very beginning, when the elixir is spilt, it is spilt by Burt Kwok. And Burt Kwok is an Asian actor who played Detective Clouseau's sort of like partner Christ, I can't remember the name now. It's terrible. But throughout the films, he was the one that would like jump out of a cupboard and have a fight and all this other stuff. Like, so they knew each other. And at the point when he spills it, he sort of says, "I know you," and it's just clearly sort of like an Easter egg. And it's fine. It sort of sets the tone. That's fine. But again, like, it's one of those things when you watch the opening of this, if you didn't know anything about the books and that, you'd be like, "What is this?" More than that, though, like, Fu Manchu is not. This is not the first outing of Fu Manchu on the screen. So there are a series of Fu Manchu films from the 60s. I don't think there's any earlier than that. 60s and early 70s. And again, Fu Manchu, not played by an Asian actor at any point, played by the great Christopher Lee, in the Hammer ones at least. And so you do get this thing of like, this is a send-up of those films as well, which were designed to be adventure, sort of like darker adventure films, that Hammer did. They didn't just do horror, they did a whole bunch of stuff, and they did do a series of adventure films, like She and completely escaped me now, but yeah, these are one of them, the Fu Manchu films. So Christopher Lee he got dressed up, he got his the skin colour changed, he would wear the garb and all this other stuff, and again, it feels incredibly uncomfortable. I've only seen one of them, and to be fair, it was fine, but it hasn't dated well. So it's clearly making a parody of those, but instead of sort of like, it misses a beat, because instead of pointing out like the ridiculousness of having a white guy playing a Chinese role, and highlighting that, it goes all in, and so that bit feels, I suppose it's relevant to it's 1980, so it's not it's clearly not the first time, it's not the last time. I mean, at least when Eddie Murphy did it, he's playing like, for the most part plays like a black actor, and he's good at it. Like, it just doesn't quite work with this, if I'm perfectly honest. But the thing is, the tone of this film's all over the place. So you have scenes that it wants to be absurd, but not too absurd. Like, they've not lent into that complete parody, as I say. So you get things like Nayland Smith having a lawnmower as his best friend, as his sort of like constant companion. His butler is very sort of self-aware of the whole thing, and so very sort of, there are jokes all around there. When it's the Queen is, Helen Mirren plays the Queen, and she's about to be assassinated or kidnapped at one point. They look for these Chinese warrior spies or assassins, whatever, in the audience, and their disguises are like really bad. Like, one's wearing like a really fake, obvious beard, one's dressed as a woman, and all this other stuff. And it's like, so there's these absurd jokes, and it's all sort of topped off by this really, really bizarre end piece that is both fantastic and awful at the same time. And so this is where the parody becomes utter absurdity. And I think, again, it's trying to tap into these ideas that have been used for things like Doctor Strangelove. Like, the absurdity, the weird. Like, you don't have to fully understand it. And again, I would even say things like Rocky Horror. Like, there's no, it's a musical ending. There's a musical event, like a musical set piece at the end of this film, where Fu Manchu does get his elixir, and then he comes out and does this big song and dance number. And that's the end of the film. That's it. And you're like, oh, right. Is there going to be more? Like, he's young again. Like, it's bizarre. And it's not even good. Like, it's not even a good song. It's like some sort of Elvis parody. It's not even, if I'm honest, I'm sorry, Nick, I'm saying all this, but it's not even funny. But there's a great scene where Nayland follows Fu Manchu down into his laboratory, and Fu Manchu and Nayland face off, and at one point you think this is going to be it. There's going to be sort of either a big monologue about why he's doing this and this sort of stuff, and Nayland's like clearly old as well. These are two guys past their prime. Like, one's 168, one's less so. But again, this is Sellers leaning into his age and that sort of thing. There's a great discussion about having someone around, and if you're 168. You see people die. You grow past people, people, and there's no one ever there to either to challenge you or to support you or to do whatever. And so he actually offers, no, he doesn't offer, he gives, I should say, he actually gives Nayland a vial of the elixir, and basically says, like, look, we could be young again, you know, like, we can do this dance forever. What do you say? And it's sort of, I know it doesn't mean to, it's clearly not trying to be deep, because the rest of the film clearly isn't. But, you know, it to me as a nerd and as a comics fan and stuff, like, this clearly taps into all those things about that we talk about with, like, Batman and the Joker, or you talk about with Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty, and you know, Green Lantern and Sinestro, or whoever. Like, there are characters that have a nemesis, like Captain America and the Red Skull. Like, they're always going to be doing this dance. You know, they are two ends of a spectrum, and so they are always going to be there. And they need to be their yin and yang, or they need to be, you know, these opposing forces. They need to exist, and it sort of it acts in a really sort of touching way of that acknowledgement of, like, look, I'm taking this, whatever. Like, I can take this, and I'm going to carry on. But I would love for you to take it too. And tomorrow morning we get up and we do this dance all over again. And it is kind of touching. Like, Nayland doesn't take it, which again is this idea of sort of, like, you know, you can take it. So, well, evil wants to persist. Evil needs to persist. And because it takes glee in it, like, it's a weird, maybe I'm reading into it, but there can be a glee in being evil, a glee in sort of, like, getting what you want. I'm 168, I'm a master, I live in this castle, I'm a master criminal, and I've got, like, ladies, and I've got gold, and I've got minions, and I've got an army, and all sort of stuff. Like, you know, I am living the life. And then you've got this aging Nayland Smith who's like, well, I put my life into bringing you down. And at this point, he's failed. Like, this film's weirdly, it has this really upbeat. The villain wins in all intents and purposes. It has a really upbeat song and dance number, and as you're watching it, Nayland Smith is sat to the side, slumped. Like, he hasn't died or anything. He's got his lawnmower back, but there is this notion that it's tiring trying to maintain the good. You know, it's exhausting, and, you know, I don't want to keep doing this. Like, you know, I'm supposed to have stopped you, and now you're back. Like, there's an exhaustion to it, and I find that fascinating. I don't think it's supposed to be a commentary on any of this, but it does act as it. You can take that, this idea of, like, come on, let's keep going. I can see there'd be certain characters that would do this, like Sherlock Holmes definitely would be leaning into this idea of saying, yeah, let's do it. Let's carry on this thing. It's what challenges me. It's what keeps the fires burning inside. But not Nayland Smith. So, anyway, so that's sort of what I take from the film. It's an interesting film. I'm glad I watched it because it's Sellers' final performance, and also having watched one of the Christopher Lee Fu Manchu films, to watch this is interesting as well as a parody and a sort of a commentary on it. Doesn't quite work as a commentary. There are moments that are fun. There are moments that I find incredibly tedious. The humour doesn't really work for me. Like, you know, leading into that absurdity as well. You find that Nayland Smith lives in a cottage in the middle of the woods, which is beautiful, but it also turns into a hot air balloon, and they use it to travel to the Himalayas. And so you sort of, it's these things of, like, this sort of this discontinuity between tones of, we want to have moments of mystery, and we want to sort of do these things, and they have comedy, and then it just leans into the absurd and then pulls back again. And it's just like, oh, one or the other. Come on, really go for it or don't. And considering that, like, this idea of I think it's the same year, 1980. Flash Gordon, you know, the sort of the big writ large camp Queen scored Flash Gordon came out the same year. It goes to show that you can do those things. I mean, I think Flash Gordon was actually a flop, but it's worked as a cult film. Like, you know, why is that a cult film and this not? And I think it comes down to that thing of accepting what it is you're trying to do. Like, Flash Gordon leans into its sort of its campy sort of, like, pulp roots and goes for it, which is cool. But one of the things that watching this film really made me think about was characters like Fu Manchu. These characters that exist from a different era. Usually held up as racial stereotypes, in a negative way. Can they be reclaimed, or should they be removed from history? Now, you can't remove them from history. The character exists. It's there. The IP is there, or whatever. So you can't cancel it. I'm sure the cancel culture would probably, if these were to be re-celebrated today, I'm sure they would be. But I don't want them cancelled. They exist in history. They should be there to be a representation of the kind of entertainment that was experienced and was enjoyed at one point. Yeah, it's wrong, but they're still pulpy adventures at heart. However, the question I have is, can Fu Manchu be redeemed? And by redeemed, I don't mean make him a hero. I don't want that. But could you do a modern Fu Manchu movie? Or even, let's make it another way. I have this idea. That's what I'm leading to, basically. I have this idea of a sort of a shared universe of pulp era heroes. So you have your sort of your top two, really. Your Batman and your Superman of the era, the Shadow and Doc Savage, and then you've got things like Justice Inc., the Spider, Miss Fury, and all these other characters that I think like Boom Studios have done a really good job of bringing back at times. And each of them have a villain in some cases, some less so than others. Like I don't think Doc Savage really had a particular villain at any one time, but you could do them, and you could have this in my head. You have basically Fu Manchu becomes the Thanos of, and that's basically that comparison is now stuck. But Fu Manchu becomes the Thanos of this pulp universe. Who is it that's behind all these things? You can have Moriarty in it, and even have have him work with Moriarty. But who's funding Moriarty? Who's giving Moriarty the money to do this, to get him going? All these other things. And you lead back to Fu Manchu, Doctor Fu Manchu. Now that's the point, Doctor Fu Manchu. He's educated, as we've said. You need to make them a reasonable threat. But it's no different to, in some respects, it's no different to Blofeld and Spectre in Bond. It's a character that sits behind the scenes and does these things. I wouldn't want it to be a representation. Take away the ethnicity thing. I'm not saying don't make him Chinese. Keep him Chinese. That's not a problem. But introduce positive Chinese characters into the film as well, or the film universe. But then take away the sort of the nationality or the nationalist element of it. Fu Manchu isn't representing China. He's not there he's not there as the Chinese government. He doesn't represent them in any shape or way. He doesn't really in the books either. There's a little bit of it, but he is more a case of his individual who runs this organisation. And it is a threat. And he's a threat because he feels that he is... Firstly, he's able to live forever. He has this mysterious elixir. He feels he's better than everyone else, or believes he's more intelligent and better than anyone else. And so is trying to manipulate the world, from behind the scenes. That's the character I think it could be. Could it work, though? Does the name mean anything anymore? If I was to introduce a tweet or a thing of Fu Manchu, would it work? And I think really some of it's going to depend on some of the things. China's becoming the second largest cinema going audience in the world, so there's a real question there of could they be a part of this? Why not make it a Chinese half done film? You want Nayland Smith in it, you want these characters, but introduce other elements, and I think if we're having sort of Shang-Chi and they're really going to do the Ten Rings, even more recently, Snake Eyes is really sort of I haven't seen it, but even at Mortal Kombat, there's a real focus on these Eastern martial art and Eastern mythological characters, even pop culture characters. So these characters that exist, Chinese stuff is big. Raya and the Last Dragon was pretty cool. Wish Dragon on Netflix was good. The Chinese and Japanese folklore is loaded with really cool ideas and stories, and I think you could really lean into some of that and make Fu Manchu sort of less of a figure of fear as a nationalist figure, but sort of utilize some of the stuff we have and make him a really cool character. And I just wonder if that's possible. Probably someone a writer better than me to do it. But that's what I'm thinking. But this film, for this film to think to possibly be the last representation of Fu Manchu on screen is quite sad, because it's 40 years ago, and no one really talks about this character. or the books by Sax Rohmer, and that may be because of the racist overtones and stuff. But I do think these are characters that could be reclaimed. I put it out there to some of these, to comic creators or someone else. Could you reclaim Dr. Fu Manchu? Could we make him relevant again today? Let's think about it. Anyway, there's my thoughts. A bit like what I do on the Patreon. This was my 30-minute thoughts thinking about the fiendish plan of Fu Manchu. I've enjoyed watching it, actually. It's always good to watch a new film that I didn't know about much. So thank you, Nick, for the donation. Thank you very much for recommending this film or requesting this film. It's been a really good experience watching it and thinking about it, and allowing me to talk about a character that sort of I've actually been thinking about talking about for a while. So this has been an access point. You'll probably hear more about Fu Manchu and Sax Rohmer in the future. So thank you very much, Nick. Appreciate it. If you want me to talk about a film or a comic or a book or any form of pop culture or 20th century geek history, go on the website. That's 20thcenturygeek.com. Get onto the bottom of the front page, and you will find a box on there that you can purchase for, I think it's for £10. I may have reduced it, I can't remember. But you can pay and donate for me to talk about one of those things. So go and check it out. More importantly, on a monthly basis, I now do a newsletter. And I talk not just about me, but I give reviews on films. I recently reviewed Black Widow, and I talk about some of the behind-the-scenes things that we're doing, some of the stuff that's coming up on this podcast, on my fellow sister podcast, Stories Out of Time and Space, that I do with Julian Darius, and also some of the stuff I do outside of the podcasting world. So there've been some great updates on Judging Dredd, which is now out for and available on Amazon and on Sequoia. And on the next book I'm working on, which is going to be called Phases of the Moon Knight, which is obviously going to be all about Moon Knight, and other things, bits and pieces. So, if you want to do that, if you go to the website, that's again 20th Century Geek, there is a subscribe button on there. Go on, subscribe to the newsletter, and there's also competitions and also other bits and pieces on there. So well worth checking out. It's a monthly newsletter. And also, if you enjoy the podcast, if you do like what we're doing, go onto your podcast catcher. Do it now. Go on, reach down. Leave us a 5-star review. If you can't leave us a 5-star review, leave whatever stars you want. Give us honest feedback. I'm happy to respond to that. But give us a review. Get us up those ratings and all that kind of stuff. And if you really love what we're doing and you want to support us, go check out Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/20cgmedia, that'd be 20cg media, we have a Patreon, and on that Patreon that supports all the podcasts under the 20th Century Geek banner. So that's 20th Century Geek and Stories Out of Time and Space, and we have 3 tiers on there, and under those 3 tiers you've got Fan, Chief and VIP, and in the Fan you get access to 30-minute thoughts, which is a 30-minute podcast in which I'll give my thoughts on something that is voted for by the patrons. We have a weekly Twilight Zone podcast, in which me and Julian Darius are working our way through. We are trekking through the Twilight Zone, episode by episode, and giving little nuggets of information and our opinions on those episodes, and little breakdowns on sort of the themes and stuff. It's been fantastic so far. And then beyond that, at the next level, you get to vote on different things as well, and you get Creator Corner, which is a quarterly podcast where I speak to a creator. This could be a writer or a podcaster or an artist or whatever, and we talk about one of the things they do and focusing on one of their projects. And on the main thing, on the VIP, one final thing you get to do as well, every quarter you get to vote on what I do on this main feed. There will be a poll and you get to choose just one thing that I get to do. It's great. So go check it out. That's patreon.com/2020cg media. Okay? Right, well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. And once again, thank you, Nick, for donating and recommending this film. And in the next episode we are going to be doing some more stuff. We've got some more films coming up. Story Time is coming back. I'm going to be talking about the Examination, and then we're also going to be doing our Summer of Stallone with our retrospective. We've got 4 films. We've got Nighthawks, Cobra, Daylight and Cliffhanger. Some of these standalone films that we haven't really talked about, so going to be picking up with those. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and I shall speak to you again soon.